Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming and talk about My Hero Academia chapter 372. Hey, I hope you're having a great day. It's Tuesday for me, hoping to get this out very quickly for the live stream. I don't think I'll be able to do live stream Tuesday or Wednesday because I have family things going on. I'm not able to get the schedule working, but Thursday I should be here. Hope to see you there. Anyway, Hero Academia chapter 372. So let me tell you the story on this. I am very confused about the chapter. I'm confused about how I feel about the chapter. When we were reading the spoilers, it was interesting because with the way the spoilers were sounding, I was ultimately coming out of it sad. As we went from Tuesday to Thursday, I was much sad about the shoji stuff here. As we got to Thursday, though, there was one part of the chapter that I thought was really just sticking out, like as a great moment. But as time went on, I was ultimately very sad. I didn't read the official chapter until a few moments before this video, and I gotta tell you, compared to the spoilers, I do have some different opinions here because the execution is different than the spoilers suggested. So that puts me in a little bit of a different spot, but I like this because I get to feel like my opinions changing in real time here. But overall with the chapter, there are some ideas that I had based on the spoilers that just don't fit with the chapter anymore, but there were some ideas that that the spoilers indicated that I still do have here. One thing that I really come out feeling, though, as I see the way this works, this is a very rushed chapter. This is so breakneck, and the spots that indicate the breakneck pace, maybe you wouldn't expect them to be what they're gonna be, but this feels like Horikoshi's like, all right, man, I gotta speed through, bro. I gotta go. The reason it's a little bit more noticeable with him is because of how thorough he can be, and there's some giant gaps here, which sometimes work and sometimes it just don't work, which really interesting. So I think the chapter is super rushed, and in theory. Theoretically, like in story structure, there's a lot of things here that should be telling you like Horikoshi switched his general style or he switched his strategy. Now look, I can try and argue to you why this is rushed, but the reality is the majority of people won't really agree with me, because we don't think in the same way. We don't look at the elements in the same way. So some people might just say, like, no, this is just like perfect base, and that's fine. Ultimately, the rushing, whether or not you believe it, only Horikoshi knows if he actually rushed through this. Although I would say that the odds are heavily in the favor of saying he did rush through this, because I see a lot of shortcuts here, and he like what he did between the panels. It plays into that. I can tell you right now, when it comes to Horikoshi style, he is trying to cram things in 100%. When you have 4 different flashbacks and 4 different focal point characters, the moment you have more than 2 focal point characters in a chapter, that's 100% telling you I gotta try and get a lot of things in here and get them through. And when you increase the focal point characters for Horikoshi, unfortunately, it shows a lot of gaps, because like what's happening here too is that Horikoshi is trying to give characters that have been criminally underserved, he's trying to make them do more. One of the big examples is Koda. Koda gets like so much characterization in the last 2 chapters, and that's 100% born from Horikoshi's mentality of like, every single character I have underserved, I have to give them something now. That, and like again, I gotta tell you, the reason he's doing that is because he knows that is what he has to do for those characters. Nejire, when she got her little flashback, he knew he had to do that because she was underserved. This is where you're getting all the ideas coming out. What's happening here is as you get closer to the end, like President Mike and Spinner, they're not probably going to get much more, so he has to serve them right now. Mind you, next chapter we might see a little bit more here, because some of the notes that he ended off on are not the best, but we'll have to see. Just to let you know, in terms of what I was sad about, like in the spoilers, I was sad that Shoji was kind of treated like he was treated the entire run of Hero Academia, that being that he did things in the background. You don't really get to see what Shoji does. Anyway, at the end of the day, what we see in the Shoji stuff is he had this idea for Shoji. We know he did. We know this was a big deal because it came up across many years. He had that idea, but at the end of the day, he also really wanted to do the bare minimum for a lot of characters like Koda. He had to go in and he had to like, in the Shoji storyline, he also had to shove in the Kurogiri return storyline, the spinner stuff, Shirakumo and the President Mike relationship, Koda's entire history and who he is, why he is the way he is. He had to shove all those things in the Shoji storyline, and ultimately it takes away some of the strength from the Shoji storyline. In terms of like a study, this is still very good because it's showing you right there his style, where things are being compromised, what rushing does to things, the checklist format, like the idea of you have to get these certain ideas out. What you should really be wondering as we leave this is he going to feel compelled to do similar things for Sato, Sero, and Ojiro? Sato and Sero in particular, Sato in particular. Is he going to do similar levels of introspection for those two characters? That's what should really be sticking in your mind. At this point, he's gone too far with Koda. If he doesn't do something for those two characters, I don't think it's going to be a good time. The problem is, though, seeing the way that he's rushing here, he knows that he can't spend too much time in this part of the manga because we know that when Izuku isn't around, people get really angsty. We know that people complain about Izuku not being around. That is the unfortunate reality here. And, I really hope that you, the dear viewers, really, consider that this is relatively hard. What Horikoshi's trying to do. The stuff that he's trying to do, like, also, like, he's doing something he knows isn't very popular because he wants to get the bare minimums of the story out. To some degree, he kind of created his own problem for himself, but, like, this is the first time he's doing a more than 300 chapter series. I do want you to, like, keep in mind that he actually doesn't have that much practice. Ending a series that's been going on for 300 chapters. He doesn't have practice planning out an entire more than 300 chapter series. So like what you're seeing here is pretty much him learning he's going to take so many lessons out of this. And I do want readers to remember that too. Like, Horikoshi is a pro because like he gets paid to do this. He's not a pro at doing a more than 300 chapter series. This is still very much a learning process. I think right now he's learning the problems with not setting characters up adequately in the first half of the story and answering them in the second half of the story. And just for you guys to know, like in terms of like when you're writing a novel, and again, novel is very different because a novel you can plan it within a smaller time frame and you have more control over that novel. You don't actually have to rely on as many inputs from the fandom the way Shonen Jump actually has to do every week. But like when it comes to a novel, like generally the characters that you establish or you indicate to the reader that are really important at the beginning of the novel should have answers at the end of the novel. You don't do what Shonen Jump does and you have like points that are said in like chapter 77 and have them answered in chapter 800. That doesn't necessarily happen in long novels unless it's a myth arc. When you're talking about like little character development things, they usually get answered in the same book that they're introduced in, especially for like if you're doing popular like light novel style books in Japan. A lot of times, when there's a focal point character for a novel, that focal point character has a story introduced in the first couple of chapters, and that story is ultimately answered in the last bits of the chapter because of the novel format. A novel requires that what's established at the beginning is answered at the end, unless you're doing like a 3-part story across 3 novels, like Dan Matthews' author sometimes does. Like, it's generally not something that you want to do. Okay, look, there's many nuances here, but what I'm saying is one thing that's very important is that elements present at the beginning get answered at the end in general. Like, again, many exceptions depending on what style you do. Horikoshi should have learned now, after seeing the struggles that are occurring here, the trouble with not setting up or seeding elements earlier on in the story. Of course, the issue here is that Horikoshi also is in Shonen Jump, where Shonen Jump is an action junkie magazine when it comes to your battle shonens, and he has to go with the pull of the crowd. He can't actually say, no, screw the audience, I'm gonna do what I want, because if he does that, he ends up with a canceled series, right? So it's a balancing act, and unfortunately the story that Horikoshi wants to tell isn't the story that jives the best with the Hero Academia fan base, and it does seem that he still wants to have a relatively strong ending for Hero Academia in terms of the metrics within Shonen Jump. That would be my analysis on the situation. Alright, so we got to go into this. We got to start breaking it down. I'm going to give more rationales behind the things going on here. We're going to point out the weird little things here, and there are a lot of weird little things. When you're shoving in 4 different perspectives, you're going to start causing problems because you have to rush through them. And Horikoshi in particular, he's the kind of person that rather is not rushing through things because he's too paranoid. He wants to be able to cover all, he wants to cover all the little quirks, but he can't really do that because he has to get through this, and it's leaving a lot of holes that he might fill up in the next couple chapters. You never really know. Again, paranoid. Now, let's see here. I wanted to just tell you, like, in terms of my personal enjoyment for the chapter, very confused. If I had to give a score, it's confused. I'm confused about what exactly is going to happen next. If I had to give a number, I'd say my personal enjoyment right now is at an 8. In terms of the technicality here, no, there are some offensive things in some spots here. Not too offensive, but like in terms of technicality, I don't think it's a perfect technical chapter because there's too many gaps, man. There's too many gaps. You can't give this a perfect technical chapter. Even knowing that this is a compromised arc because this is Horikoshi like fighting against the fandom and trying to give a storyline that he wanted to do, even within the standards of a compromised bit, it is just not technically strong. So going into page 1. This is the page where people have been saying that Toga or Ochako told people about what Toga was doing. This is one of those pages where you show it to people and be like, if these guys talked to the teachers more than we thought, then it is perfectly reasonable to say that Ochako managed to tell someone about Toga. And that's why Toga ends up on an island where she can do minimal damage, alright? Very critical. And again, Horikoshi style, this is him, what he's doing. He doesn't want to take away the momentum, so he's showing the setup phases whenever they come up and whenever they're important. In the first page, we find out that something's going to happen in Central Hospital. And we find out because Mutant Girl comes in and she is useful. We again see another shot of Shoji talking to Mutant Girl. Speaking of Shoji talking to people, we didn't get any Pony still. So you know what, my heart, I'm going to have to give up on that. I would have loved a little flashback to Pony and like some kind of comment about, hey, it's okay to call other mutant shapes girls if you're a mutant shape. Something like that. But we're not really getting that anymore. Maybe it'll happen next week. I'm not too sure. But no Pony. But we get Animal Girl. All right. Or the big lady, as All Might calls her. Alright, so we find out about that. And we find out that there's a call to action, and we learn that there is a group that are going after the hospital. So the heroes knew this ahead of time. I do have to wonder why didn't they transfer Kurogiri out of there? Like, they know they're going for the hospital. As we find out later, they know the rumors didn't work. The false information they spread. I really gotta ask, why not use Monoma, warp Kurogiri to UA? Because if Nedzu has the time to make a fully functioning society, and he has metal that can change shapes like it's nanobots, and they have Momo, and Momo was able to like create a machine that was able to like try and restrain Izuku so easily, I don't fully understand why not use Monoma, teleport Kurogiri out of Central Hospital, and put him in like Nedzu's office or something, or put him in the basement, or put him where the shelters are, and put some heroes on it to guard it. I'm not sure. Why not do that? It'd be very easy. Just make it a small operation with only All Might, Aizawa, Present Mike, and Nedzu as the people that need to know, and Monoma, I guess. Heck, man, can you imagine the big brain play of putting Kurogiri underneath Shigaraki's feet? It would be so arrogant, but like, bro, I can tell ya, All For One would not have figured that out unless he has some kind of sense quirk. Oh, I guess he has Search. Search might have caused the problem. I wonder. They know he has Search. How could they even think that hiding Kurogiri's location was even a possible situation? How could they have thought that was possible? Huh. Like, if the enemy has Search, and we know that All For One had Search before he got caught, because he loaded it into Shigaraki, and at that point, Shigaraki, like, All For One could have seen Kurogiri and could have applied Search to him. If they know the enemy has Search, how could they have thought that their information warfare would have worked? Okay, you know what? Now we're getting into the reads on it. Doesn't matter. Kind of matters. Doesn't matter, but overall, I feel like there were more options here. Hey, actually, Shiketsu. Yeah, that's the better way to do it. Take him, put him Shiketsu, put someone on that, someone you trust. That would have been an incredible movement here because Shiketsu is being talked to be equivalent to UA in terms of the security that they're putting up. That would have been a good way to do it. Maybe put Inasa on it. That you could have gotten something happening there. Or, they maybe did it and we're just seeing like some kind of hologram. Anyway, that was a lot. Just a lot of things occurred to me. Guys, point out where I was wrong there because I just had the thought, so I don't know how tight that was. Anyway, big thing here is that we find out that what they're going to do. So the villains aren't doing a very good job of keeping things under wraps, but this is kind of what happens when you have, like, civilians getting involved too. Like, you shouldn't be expecting information to stay tight. So I would hope that someone on the villain side was aware of the possibility that this information leaked out to UA, given that people were just telling civilians. That's how civilians get involved, right? Anyway, we go on to page 2. We have Shoji having a character moment saying, standing back while this plays out would mean I could never be a hero or call myself a hero. So this is just, again, establishing Shoji's character. Like, I don't know if you've already noticed this, but Shoji's pretty much perfect. He's probably going to become Buddha by the end of his lifetime. And then we have the critical page here where it turns the focus onto present Mike. And this is where it reveals that the flashback came from present Mike's perspective. Now, I didn't mention this in last time, but when you have flashbacks within flashbacks, that's not generally a good spot to be in. Because, like, when you have a flashback within a flashback, it tells the reader that there was critical information that should have come up earlier, and you weren't able to get to it, so you have to shove it in right before it's worthwhile. And the flashback here in particular is the flashback that President Mike is having about Shoji, where he then flashbacks to talking about Animal Girl. And in the previous chapter, we had the flashback to when Shoji and the kids were talking, and then they like flashback to Shoji's flashback, right? Like, generally, if you're just a casual enjoyer, you're not really gonna like say anything about it. But like, if you were writing novels and you get your critical reviews, that's the kind of thing that someone point out, like, that's just confusing, especially if you're writing in a novel format. It doesn't really matter for Horikoshi because that kind of review, that kind of critical review, would only impact you if you're like a novelist that's starting out, like when reviews really matter. But for Horikoshi, it really won't matter. Like, the majority of people won't be able to point out what exactly are the technical problems with having a flashback within a flashback, other than the indicator that this is the proof of something going wrong in the planning stages. It's a very abstract thing to argue, so like majority of people won't really have a problem with it. Also, in manga format, it's easier to understand, but it's still like the biggest proof of, I know I didn't give you the proper information in the proper timeline. Here it is now, right? Page 2 and 3 reveals that it's President Mike who's having a flashback, and you have this line of, Yamada, I hate to ask, but can you be there to support the boys? And it's like, okay, hey bro, so we have these soldiers, they're child soldiers we're sending in. I hate to ask you, but as you're their teacher and all of that, and you do have a responsibility to keep them safe, but could you be there to support them? The same way that you might be there to support all the other people that are kind of in the fight. The same way that you were kind of supporting the police officers and just, dealing with like over 1,000 enemies. Can you just be there to support them? This is a stupid question. What do you mean you hate to ask? Bro, you're going into a war. You're using children's soldiers. What do you mean you hate to ask? No! He's a hero! No. Nah, that's silly dialogue. Like, you understand the feeling behind it, though. It's like, oh, the kids are going into like these really hard fights. Just make sure you can be there for them, but like, this kind of stuff shouldn't have to be asked. You shouldn't have to be saying, I hate to ask this of you, as if this is like something that is going entirely out of the way. Unless he's specifically saying like, hey bro, you were going to be in another spot, but like, maybe you can go here to help those guys out. But then it's like, does that make sense? Does that make sense for President Mike to not be a central hospital, given that he's one of the few people connected to Kurogiri? That doesn't make sense, right? So I'm being super critical, but like, it's just like the framing on that particular line is silly, all things considered. Is it sillier than like Mitsuki suddenly talking about it's gonna rain and Bakugo's gonna be sad? Nah, it's not silly. You can tell the emotion behind it, but I just don't think the context of the situation justifies that line. Personal opinion on that one. It's not technically bad. The technically bad line is the next one. Know this, Aizawa Sensei. So that the sensei is bolded here because like he's just, there's a little bit of a quip here. They say quirks get stronger by the generation. Okay, so this part is actually really important because that's actually a line that's linked to Present Mike. Present Mike is one of the people that brings in the idea of quirk singularity theory. He's like, this is calling back specifically to his Bakugo Todoroki time when they were doing the provisional license stuff, right? These kids know these young men are already way stronger than we were back in our day as the Three Amigos. Here is the technical problem. This doesn't make sense in any which way because they say quirks get stronger by the generation. He's saying that at this age, these guys are already wielding greater power than what these guys were doing in their age, and therefore you don't have to worry about them as much. No. That is a lie. That is the biggest lie. Bro, Shoji is nothing. He's really good at surveillance, but he is nothing. All he did was give himself a little bit more of a strength boost. Present Mike is an AoE quirk attacker, alright? He attacks in a very unique way. He can do a lot of technical damage. He can take down many people in a crowd. Shoji can't do that. Shoji is not in any way comparable. Bro, Aizawa is unstoppable. There is no quirk that actually lets them protect themselves from Aizawa unless they're like some kind of generation quirk that creates a wall between them and Aizawa. Aizawa is so powerful that in Hero Academia, he has only ever been depowered. Think about that. Aizawa is on the same kind of level that All Might's in the sense of he only ever gets depowered. There are no advantages to being Aizawa. So here's the big issue. Now, if you're going for like the spirit of it, oh yeah, because the idea of Shonen Jump is that the next generation always is stronger than the first or the previous. Like they have the heart of heroes. You could say like, yeah, these young men, they are already like way stronger than we were internally. They have more going on with them. They were raised in fire. You can make that that argument. The problem is qualifying it with, they say quirks get stronger by the generation. You should have nixed that right out of there. You shouldn't have brought the quirks in, because when we go into it and we actually analyze the quirks being compared here, that being Shoji's tentacle stuff and Koda's sudden power upgrade with calling a bunch of animals into the area, you find that this is not a very fair comparison. To this day, Aizawa is the most critical person on any battlefield. To this day, Aizawa is keeping All For One Shigaraki under control there. And he's been doing that same level of thing since he was a kid. Nah, you cannot compare these two situations. So like what you should have done in this particular one, get rid of the quirk stronger by generation because it's a qualifier. That qualifier should not be here. It doesn't make sense. And you should have just sticked with the spirit of these guys are getting stronger internally. It just doesn't work. Shoji's stronger punch than usual, and Koda's more animals. Like I can make an argument for the animals being like stronger, but like Present Mike's an AoE attacker who like we just see get away from like a whole bunch of civilians they neutralized. And Aizawa is hacked. Again, when you have a character that's being depowered actively throughout the series because he's too powerful in terms of like the meta of the series, you can't make this stipulate. You can't argue this when it comes to the quirks. Now, mind you, this is a very, very, very technical point. But the thing is, like, that's kind of what technical points always are. They don't really affect your casual audience. But like, when I see the technicality here, when I see like a bad qualifier, it's a bad qualifier. And again, this is my argument for it, but it's an extremely bad qualifier. You shouldn't have used the quirks for being what it is. I see that as the author trying to connect things, and in his rush, he's like overlooking the nuances involved here, right? But again, it's up to interpretation. I really want to press this on you. Does it affect the normal reader? Not really. All this might indicate is the level of hecticness behind the scenes. And that's an entirely abstract concept. It doesn't actually impact sales. Like, do I think that line's going to impact sales? No way, bro. No way. There's no way it's going to do that. Wow, 26 minutes. Sorry, I'm really passionate about the chapter because, like, usually when there's things going wrong, there's more to talk about. Okay, so then we go into the other perspective shift. So now we're in there. We gotta really get Koda in there. We gotta get him to do stuff. We gotta make sure people know who this guy is. We get the whole thing about one day your horns will grow in too. I had a very funny conversation with commenter White Despair. I thought Koda already had horns, but I guess he's gonna get more. So what you see here, other than it being like super super cute, is you have the whole thing about this is what the horns are doing. The horns will beam your thoughts to more animals. So this is Horikoshi saying like, okay guys, this is why, like, you know, this is how it works. This is how we get more animals. Nothing really wrong there. We then have a quick little story here where we find out that Koda's dad is actually like the coolest guy ever, who was defending Koda's mom. No wonder they got together. They look like a lovely couple. And then we have Koji, it's okay to be mad. Grow up to be a man who gets mad when people mock something or someone dear to you. Commenter White Despair made, I think, a really good comment. I think it was him that made the comment, but Koda is essentially the person that Shoji advocates for people to be. Be someone that gets angry for the right reasons, right? And the big thing here with Koda, too, is that Koda is a soft-spoken person. So what you see here is a big character moment for him because he's acting very fiercely for something he believes in, and that is don't make fun of Shoji. He's a really really cool guy. Going to page 5, I didn't notice this, but you actually have President Mike coming in there to support Octo Expansion attack, right? This was very good, and we get to see Koda taking out the one League of Villain guy. It's just a flurry of animals. It's terrified, and we'll have to see what happens in the next chapter. So one big thing here is that with President Mike there, you get to see the very clear support. Although I would say, like, we should be doing that normally, but all good stuff. Now, Spinner ultimately continues going, and commenter White Despair had a point that Shoji seems more underwhelming because Spinner, you know, is able to continue going, and noticing that President Mike hit him too. The thing is, Spinner is just a tank at this point, so there is that knee-jerk response of saying that Koda did more, but then you have to like just apply the logistics of like, well, it's a different situation, you know, Spinner is built like a tank right now. It does do something for the impact, because it's like you have to put that little note on Shoji like, oh, he wasn't able to break through to Spinner, right? You have to put the little failure on Shoji while Koda gets a possible little success there. You know, that's just one of those things that happens. If we had more time, maybe this could have been a little bit more worked out. But what can you really do? We go into page 6. We see that Shoji got hurt, likely because of like all the scales falling off of him. We have Shoji trying to talk to Spinner. So one unfortunate thing is that Shoji is kind of losing the rhetorical battle because he continues trying to speak to Spinner, but he has not acknowledged that Spinner is functionally slow. So, you know, not understanding that is technically a rhetorical loss on that point, a symbolic loss if you want to call it that. But it's important because it tells us more about Shoji's character. That's really what Spinner has become. He's a sounding board. Because Spinner is there, Shoji gets to declare to the readers, hey, bro, this is what I'm about. And he doesn't get any retorts from Spinner, really, that are worthwhile. Again, just tells you that Shoji's a good guy. We then have Shoji saying, don't let them exploit your wounds, and it's superimposed with Aoyama. I remember Kayla, a commenter, was very upset about this because he wasn't thinking about Izuku, but this actually makes more sense for why it's Aoyama. It's specifically, don't let All For One take advantage of what has hurt you and use you for his own gains, right? He's not really using Izuku. The one who's getting used is Aoyama, right? And that's what's happening here with Spinner. That's why you have the connection specific to Aoyama, because he's the one being directly manipulated by a villain by using a pain that he has in his heart, right? And this is just, again, telling you that this is what All For One does. He takes advantage of useful idiots who have issues, and then he rules them. That's pretty much who he is. He's not very smart. He can't actually handle people who are smarter than him, so he has to use useful idiots who are victims of society. Now, Shoji here says something that I thought was great. Because this is what I always talk about, that, yeah, in the next generation, if they're not careful here, people might target them for in retaliation, and then, you know, in the next generation they might have, but you guys tried to attack a hospital. You guys contributed to the chaos. You guys were as ugly on the inside as you were the outside. That's like the worst line for the mutant shapes right now. So when Shoji says your children might be the next target, Yeah, no, they might be the target of like someone exploiting someone's wounds and then directing them towards the children of the people who were responsible for the initial wounding. So this is a really good line, really robust. Shoji understands the cycle of revenge and the cycle of retaliation very well. This is just, carrying on from what makes him like pretty much a Buddha at this point. And then we have something that when I saw it on the spoilers, I felt so sad. The little girl that Shoji saved ended up being the reason that he got beat up by the people in the village. That was really unfortunate. And as you guys know in the last video, that I had that whole bit where it's like this girl might have been the reason, but let's really hope not. I really thought Horikoshi was going to leave it up in the air, but now Horikoshi comes in very heavy-handed, make sure we're all clear that no good deed goes unpunished. Now the juxtaposition of putting that little flashback in there with be better than mere Avengers is really important, because what this is essentially saying is just because the previous generation was terrible doesn't mean the next generation is going to be terrible. That little girl ultimately was crying about what the older people did to Shoji, showing that there is more hope here. And that's why the whole thing about your children might be the next target. People got to remember that there is another generation coming up behind them. And you don't want to like attribute the sins of the father onto the next generation on both sides. Now, here is something very critical. We have the grudge never fades. We see that the text, the font is a little bit different. Spinner is still having trouble speaking. This is really important because this is going to be important for the last bit of the chapter, which I personally did not super enjoy one specific thing about it. But what's important here is to see that Spinner is still bestial and his thought processes are still damaged in this moment. I really gotta stress this. This is actually really, really critical for something happens later. The speech pattern. So we have the people reacting to Spinner. We find out that Spinner, for the crime of walking in public, was sprayed with pesticide. We have flashbacks. I would assume that this is like, okay, I don't really care. Maybe it's like, it might be villain arc, or it might be like right before the start of the war, like flashbacks of Spinner being sad. Anyway, crimes of them spraying with pesticide. At this point, with all the flashbacks, you can see that we are now in the Spinner folk. So we have Spinner actually stringing together a lot. This is very coherent. He's still bestial, but very coherent. We hit them back, brethren. We heard or be heard and follow me. So this is a really critical moment, because this is where like Spinner just all of a sudden like gets into gear. And he jumps straight towards Central Hospital. This is where things get confusing, and this is where you start to see that the rushing really began. We have Shoji pointing out, like, oh my god, like, this guy's even stronger now. Yeah, welcome to, like, Nomu physics. Even stronger. I do find it funny that, like, Shoji's marker for power is that Spinner can break concrete. Like Izuku was breaking concrete with Black Whip when it first came out in joint training, all right? Like Shoji really was outclassed here. Anyway, we find out they're more fired up. So Spinner jumps, and then all of a sudden we see people swarm. The confusing thing is that when you go back to Present Mike had caught a bunch of people with the other policemen. So where exactly is President Mike in that stampede is what I want to know. I want to know what the actual spatial relations are here. Because we know that when there's a stampede, people die. Like Kara was telling me, my friend was telling me about like an incident in Korea where people died from a crowd. I forget what it's called, but like, suffocated due to a crowd stampede, or like, there's an official term for it. I'm kind of curious about what exactly is going on there, because where Spinner is in relation to that hospital indicates they were pretty far back, so all of a sudden they all just kind of pushed through. I really hope that the people that were caught weren't stampeded. And then we have a really powerful image of a gun showing up, so very good. The police brought out the guns. They most likely tried to shoot at Spinner and failed. Given that we see Spinner squishing the living daylights out of this one police officer, it's like, alright bro, yeah, shit. That sucks. Now, there's one character that shows up here. It's the guy that looks like a boar. I think that's a pig face, right? Here's where you can tell that something's happening with Horikoshi's pacing. We saw him on page 8. He was actually still below Spinner, looking up at him when they're talking about the call to action. My question is Spinner has superhuman speed and strength. He got to Central Hospital super quickly. How were they able to keep up with Spinner? Why are they right behind him? That doesn't make sense. Not really. Right? Like you can fill in the gaps, but once it requires readers to start filling in the logical gaps, it's because, you know, at the rate it's going, it's because like you had to get rid of those transitionary pages. Now, I gotta say though, the little thing of like the bang bang and the gun, it's a really powerful image. And like now that we're at the end of the chapter, what you're gonna be seeing is a lot of really powerful image. So we get to page 11. We have Kurogiri was transferred to the research wing. We have play a recording of either Mai or Tamura's voice, which is like, Kurogiri is responsive. I don't really understand what like doing that will do for Kurogiri other than like if he's asleep. But like he's a very responsive guy. He was responsive enough to like, you know, President Mike and Aizawa. But all right, Kurogiri's quirk will bring this conflict to an end. All right, I'm sure if you tell them where you guys are, maybe. I mean, like, we all understand why it's an important quirk. It's because that quirk can regroup everyone. Maybe it has another secret function we don't really know. So we have Spinner getting in. He's bringing in his crowd, and we see this wonderful shot of the doctors against the world. And I had a funny joke, and you probably saw it in the title, but like, I should have seen it coming. Of course, Central Hospital was always fated to fight against Spinner. You know, I wish I could have seen it coming. Because, like, really, Horikoshi set it up from the beginning. Spinner is the Bowser to Central Hospital's Mushroom Kingdom. The moment that he brought Yoshi and the Toads into this world, into Central Hospital, we should have known it was going to be Spinner coming here because he's the only Bowser-like character in the universe. Yeah, no, man. Freaking genius right there. He gets, like, a 10 out of 10 genius bonus. Anyway, I do want to say, like, this one doctor... My heart goes out to her. She looks tired. They have bags under their eyes. Man, I hope she's alive. Here at Academia, like, there's a pretty good chance she might be alive. And especially, she's like Central Hospital, man. Like, she might be able to, like, fit herself out with some, like, really hardcore prosthetics. Anyway, we find out that Spinner might become Tamura's hero. And this is just, like, regular power, like, you know, this is just regular power dynamics, like, deal with the devil kind of stuff. You just go for their insecurities. Like, Spinner would love to be Shigaraki's hero because that's his friend, right? Like, you know, Spinner's not that hard to manipulate. You just tell him something nice about how he can be someone great for Shigaraki. No name Spinner who only follows people like a leaf in the wind. Yeah, no, man, like, this is 100% like simple manipulation. It makes sense. Anyway, we see the doctors. The mutant shapes are beginning to feel something, and then we go into page 12, which by itself in isolation, along with actually page 12 and 13 together, amazing pages. Like, this is kind of haunting because like when you understand what's going on in it, it's like, wow. So keep in mind that Spinner runs, and just running destroys the hallway, right? This guy stops. You see the clatter and the clang, and that's a very powerful little sound effect. The use of white space was amazing here. Spinner is running. This guy, angry, stopped what he was doing after he just saw Spinner treat those doctors like bowling pins. You know, like how Mario gets like super huge and giant, and he starts running through the first level, and how he's breaking everything. Like all the blocks are being destroyed. The Koopas are like flying everywhere. The Goombas. Central Hospital just became Koopas and Goombas. This is what happens when Bowser invades the Mushroom Kingdom with Mario logic. These guys just watched doctors get steamrolled by Spinner. You better hope there is some Mushroom Kingdom level physics going on here. And now, to get more serious, this is actually a very important thing here. Remember how I was talking about Spinner's thought process, like the way he was speaking? And remember how like the rest of the chapter had showed the way that how they had showed the difference in his speech by switching the font. If you go back to chapter 371, recall that Spinner, we saw his thought processes at some points. Like, this is Spinner. This is where his brain was at. And then we even had like an inner panel where we say, "Ask me if I have plan." What's his problem? Boy, hurt me. Right? He's not very, the cognition just ain't there. But then, in page 12 and 13, I thought I'd never get to be it, but by following you, maybe I can really be someone. I've got all my allies behind me, or I've got my allies behind me. Also, the shot of him saying he has allies and there be nothing behind him, it makes him look delusional or something like that, right? Very nicely done. What's important here is the cognition. At this moment is the moment when Spinner stopped just being a victim taking advantage of. At this moment where he drank the all-for-one Kool-Aid and he started acting as himself. It's the moment that he accepted where he was here. His cognition, suddenly he just grabs it. So as a reader, I'm actually a little bit sad because like now it's like Spinner claimed some autonomy here. I don't know how he got back his cognition, but this is too much. This is like I'm seeing his inner thoughts. I'm seeing his truest thoughts, and they're clear. So I'm sad because this is the moment where, for whatever reason, he just suddenly started accepting what he was doing. It's like the moment that All For One, he remembers All For One saying that you can be Shigaraki's hero. It's like it jogs him up a little bit. Now we get to the bottom of page 13. And like this panel, the sequence of panels was confusing. Because like I'm pretty sure I had 4 wrong interpretations about this panel. But it ultimately kind of changed my opinions on the chapter quite a bit. But, you know, I'm still kind of fluctuating. Spinner turns around. He finds out he doesn't have any allies behind him. And then we have the line, Shoji must have gotten through to them. At first, I thought that this was Spinner talking and he was going towards it. But then I can see the little squiggle on the next one. So the one that says Shoji must have gotten through to them was Present Mike. Now, here's the thing with that line. And the thing that makes me like doubt things. I don't think Shoji got through to like a lot of people. Because people were still rushing in to Central Hospital. How can you really say that Shoji got through to them? What got through to them was Spinner treating those doctors like bowling pins, right? So we have this thing of Present Mike getting in there. And like at this point you gotta really be asking like, okay, how did Present Mike manage to catch up with this guy who's going at full steam ahead, right? Like what's going on here? What's the physics involved here? And it's just like one of those spots of like, you know it's being rushed because you're not getting the full picture of how everyone's getting to different locations. But it doesn't really matter. We get Present Mike coming in. He says that guy in there is not going to be your ace in the hole. And then we go into the thing where they both rush in towards Kurogiri. You have Spinner shouting Kurogiri and you have Present Mike shouting Shirakumo. Now, I do think that this shot is very good. I do like the idea of it. I do gotta say, though, one thing that doesn't work here is, like, you know, it's kind of framed like a big moment of, like, hey, call out to your ally and use the name by which you understand him. The thing with Spinner is that, you know, when you compared to Present Mike has all that emotional history with him. Spinner doesn't really have that. So this is one of those moments where it's like, you know, Spinner's talking to him as an ally in the service of All For One Shigaraki, not really a friend. So like when he calls out to him, it's like, you know, that emotional way isn't there. So like they're not the exact same situation. If Spinner had more panels with Kurogiri where they were just generally friendly, I think that would have been nice. But Kurogiri was always so tied to Shigaraki that you didn't really get to see this kind of stuff. And then Kurogiri gets removed from the story when he goes to find Higanto Makia. So it removes how much time they could really spend together and, like, you know, have more friendship between them. So this is one of those moments where I think showing more camaraderie there would work. Like showing more camaraderie between Spinner and Kurogiri the way that he had with Shigaraki, I think would have worked a little bit better here. Anyway, we have an emotional plea in general, in the idea of it, of two people saying the different names and calling out to this one person. I think it's really good, but I do think, you know, maybe Spinner could have used a bit more oomph behind it. Also, Spinner still having his thought process impacted is a really big issue there. Anyway, overall, that is chapter 372. Right now, you know, like, Shoji, I'm just sad. I do come out of it a little bit sad still. Shoji was a character that was always in the background, and, you know, President Mike is telling us that Shoji must have gotten through them, but like his language there, he must have, means that he doesn't really know either. Or like it implies he doesn't know, like he's assuming it must have been Shoji that did something. I do wonder, did he not see the carnage that Spinner must have created in order to get past those doctors? Was that not there? You know, why is he speaking like that? That might be the author's hand showing a little bit there, like the author himself wants to tell you that Shoji did something when it just doesn't, It's not like the reality that we're seeing there isn't strong enough to support that. But Shoji, ultimately, if he did something, it was spin off screen, but I really don't think he has. I think it would be better to say that he was able to convince a few people to slow down. But when you look back at page 8 and 9, you know, people started running in there. Like, things sped up like crazy at page 8 and 9. Like, you go from Spinner jumping to people noticing, to people like screaming and running, and the cops being overwhelmed. I just don't see the reality of Shoji having done anything worthwhile in terms of slowing them down. Again, Spinner is his own worst enemy in this case. So like, that's one point where it's like, I don't know, author, we gotta see till next week. But I'm just yeah, the chapter was super, a lot of content, super, like, it was, the author wanted to do a lot of things in it. He was really packing things in there. Do I think it worked out for the chapter? It moves the story along, but there's so many different ideas in it that it just, you can really see the cracks a little bit more than before. But again, this was a compromised arc that we were stepping into. The fan reaction to it has kind of proved that it's a relatively compromised arc. Yeah, we're gonna have to see what happens next week. Kurogiri is a very critical thing, and also I had to like correct something. Now that we look at it, that moment when we were with All For One screaming, and we then go to Spinner, that was already in the flashback. So we don't really know when the All For One scream is getting involved here, which is a little bit unfortunate. So he flashed back before we actually got the full information that we got the flashback. But yeah, Spinner still, we still don't know the nature of those lights. We're gonna have to see what happens here with Kurogiri. I'm sure it's going to be a fun time, but this week there's no Hero Academia, so next week is when it comes out because it's on break. Guys, let me know what you thought down below, and until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.